Part 2.
Session will then be dedicated to role plays. Now, I'd like to move on to the topic of using agreement templates and term sheets. It's common to start out with an existing contract template, which gives you a kind of blueprint of the things that are usually included in such an agreement. It's important to realise that negotiating with a contract template means that it's necessary to review the terms and conditions it contains carefully. Please note that you have to consider what is not in the agreement but should be. That is, what's missing and should be added. This is really just as important as carefully reviewing the language in the agreement. Here, I want to stress that it'd be wise to consult with a senior lawyer, preferably someone who has experience negotiating agreements of the kind that you are negotiating. When using a term sheet as the basis of negotiations, it's imperative to keep good notes of all discussions or emails regarding the items on the sheet. Term sheets are usually used by lawyers to transfer the terms that have been agreed into an official agreement. So it's crucial that the information on these sheets is precisely what's been agreed on by all parties. Sometimes a lawyer will incorporate items from a term sheet onto an agreement template. In such a case, he should be careful not to include language originally in the template that isn't appropriate. Okay, now I'd like to turn to some general negotiating techniques. It's good practice to separate the issues at stake into different categories in your mind. Things you can't possibly accept, major points, minor points, and things you can easily live without. Then you can make trades with the other side, one item for another. This is also known as horse trading. It can go like this. I'll change this provision to what you want if you agree to add a provision that I want. When it comes to discussing numbers, if possible, let the other side suggest the first number. In the case of a sales contract, for example, the first number the other side states is usually the least he expects to pay, whereas the seller's first number is the highest amount he thinks he might be able to get. My advice is to know the number you really want to end up with and try to suggest a starting number that'll force the other side to respond with a number that, when combined with your starting number, will average out to a number you'd be happy to accept. So, what you do is propose meeting the other party in the middle by averaging the two numbers out. My next point has to do with overcoming some of the objections you'll commonly hear in a negotiation. Sometimes the other party will object to removing a clause that you don't want by saying something like, "Don't worry, we won't hold you to that item, so we'll just leave it in." In such a case, you should insist that the item's taken out. The best argument in this situation is to say that if they're not going to hold you to it, then why not just take it out of the agreement? It's important to be aware that the people involved in making the agreement could all one day lose their jobs or take employment with another company, and so their promise not to hold you to something is worthless because they might not be around anymore. Almost all agreements contain a merger clause, which states that anything that was said or written before the agreement was signed does not matter unless it's explicitly written in the agreement. All right. There are some other objections that can be raised in the course of a negotiation. These include quite a